Right, it's back by popular demand. Another Did You Know video about things about Newcastle. And here I'm on the quayside today, what I think is the jewel in Newcastle's crown. It's just fantastic. It's got the bridges, the river, the cafes, the restaurants, the old buildings. There's just so much going on and so much history. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 5 things that you probably don't know about Newcastle's quayside. It's coming up. Number 1, how much do you know about the Great Fire of Newcastle back in 1854, which basically obliterated the whole of the quayside of Newcastle and Gateshead? So it was on the 6th of October 1954 between 12 and 1 o'clock, where a constable from Newcastle Police, John Ewart, was walking on his patrol when he spotted flames coming from the Wilsons and Sons worsted factory, which is basically a factory that yarns wool. So he ran across the old Tyne Bridge trying to raise the alarm, and eventually he got local fire engines and soldiers from local barracks to come and help try and fight this fire. It would have been quite a scene, and for a couple of hours this went on as crowds started to gather, gaining a vantage point to see this, which would have been a really spectacular thing to view at the time, lighting up the whole of the River Tyne, the buildings and all the boats. They were stood on the high level bridge, on the Tyne Bridge, on the quayside, just gawping at this fire. Little did they know what was going to happen next. So at about 3 o'clock, about 2 hours after the fire was discovered, the roof fell in, but right next to the building was an old bonded warehouse with a concoction of flammable chemicals. And about 3:10, after a series of little pops which were ignored, the whole thing exploded like a volcano. And by all accounts from records at the time, people in South Shields actually thought there was an earthquake. The explosion was that big. Masonry, timber, twisted metal, burning chemicals just exploded into the air and flew like missiles all over and went across the River Tyne onto the quayside, smashing into buildings, wiping out people. It was absolute carnage. It basically set that whole section of Newcastle on fire until eventually it was put out, but the place was absolutely devastated. Almost no building was left untouched in the general quayside area of Newcastle, or this section of Gateshead where I'm stood now, which is right next door to the doors of the Sage. All in all, 53 people died and about 400 people were injured. The nearby churchyard, St Mary's, just next to me here, that was almost obliterated, and gravestones from the graveyard there were catapulted into the air and landed in various parts of Gateshead. So the 2 buildings in question where the fire happened was Wilson's and Son, which was a worsted wool factory, and Bartram's, which was a chemical bonded warehouse. Both sat roughly where the Stacks complex is there, right underneath the Tyne Bridge. Of course, the current Tyne Bridge wasn't around in 1854, but you'll get an idea of where those 2 buildings were. Number 2, how much do you know about the bridges that cross the Tyne between Newcastle and Gateshead here? Do you know how many bridges there are? Do you know which one's the oldest? And do you have any idea why the Tyne Bridge looks so similar to the Sydney Harbour Bridge? Now, the oldest of the 7 bridges that are currently standing is right behind me. That's the high level bridge that was opened in 1849, whilst the old brick Georgian Tyne Bridge was still standing, the one with the 9 arches. And the high level bridge is a 2-tier bridge. Underneath you have a road for traffic, general transport, and on the top tier it's a railway line. But at the time when the bridge was built, you had just one line going into Central Station, and then the trains had to reverse back out, so that caused some logistical problems. So they later went on to build the King Edward VII Bridge, which gave it an in and out system. The bridge behind me, the low one, the red one, that's the Swing Bridge. That was opened in 1876 after the old Georgian Tyne Bridge was closed in 1867. So it's on exactly the same site as the old brick Tyne Bridge. And it's a swivel bridge which allows ships to go back and forth between the old Elsick shipyard, which is about a mile further along the west of the river. So behind me, that's the King Edward VII Railway Bridge that was opened in 1906, and that helped facilitate the building of 4 more railway lines, which meant you could go in and out of Central Station without having to reverse back out. Of course, behind me, over my right-hand shoulder there, you've got that bad boy, the Tyne Bridge, opened in October 1928 by King George V. Now, you might see some similarities between the Tyne Bridge and the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but the Sydney Harbour Bridge is 3 times longer and 3 times wider, but in fact, They were designed by the same bridge engineering firm based in London, Mott, Hay and Anderson, and built by the same company in Middlesbrough, Dorman and Co. So there's got huge similarities, but this Tyne Bridge was opened in 1928. The Sydney Harbour Bridge was opened in 1932. So that's why there's such a similarity between the two bridges. So behind me is the Queen Elizabeth II Metro Bridge, which was opened in 1981. And this helps facilitate the metros passing over the River Tyne for what I have to say is a brilliant Tyne and Wear metro service. And the bridge behind me, that's the Redheugh Bridge, opened in 1983, and that I believe was the third version of that particular bridge in that particular location, which provided greater road transport links between the north and the south of the River Tyne. And the seventh bridge to be built is of course the Millennium Bridge, which was opened in 2001, commonly referred to as the Blinking Eye. And this particular bridge, it pivots in order to allow taller boats and ships to pass underneath. So that's your 7 bridges over the River Tyne connecting Newcastle and Gateshead centres. And I think it was Julius Caesar who said, you can never have too many bridges over the River Tyne. True story, I think I'll do a video about it. Number 3, that building over my left shoulder there, Sirtes, the Italian Tapas bar, used to be the home of the Tyne Tees steam shipping company. Between 1904 and 1976, you could wander into those offices there, buy a ticket for a boat, walk across the road and jump on a boat to take you to various places in Europe, also to Middlesbrough or even down to London, which would take about 24 hours. At its peak, it employed about 400 people and owned 10 steamers. One of those, its pride and joy, was the Tynesider, which was commissioned in the Wallsend shipyard back in 1888. Now the building epitomises what the quayside is today, a place for socialising, for restaurants, pubs and cafes. And before Sabas, I think it was called Sabatini's. And on the side of the wall there, you'll see the old plaque which commemorated the building for what it was used for back in the day. Number 4, any idea what this really old Tudor looking building is here on the quayside in the area of Sandgate right next to the river? Well, back in the 15 and 1600s there was 2 buildings, one called Sirtes House and another one called Millbank House. Well, one house now collectively called Bessie Sirtes, and they're owned by Newcastle City Council but leased out to Historic England, which cultivates and cares and promotes historical landmarks and land. So they're both known now as Bessie Sirtes House, and I'll come to why in just a minute. But during that great Newcastle fire of 1854, this was the only building that actually wasn't damaged during that horrific fire. The building's also really famous because there's a bit of a love story went on back in 1772. The daughter of the merchant who lived there, Mr. Sirtes, his daughter Bessie Sirtes, was in love with a local coal merchant's son called John Scott. And on the 18th of November 1772, she eloped with John Scott. And I don't know if you can see that window on the first floor there. She climbed down from there in the middle of the night to elope with John Scott, who later became Earl of Eldon and Lord Chancellor of England. So like I say, Historic England occupy the building there now. So if you're interested in history and the local area, pop in. It's free to go in through the week and it'll tell you anything you want to know about the history of this local area. Number 5, any idea what Newcastle's second oldest pub is? Well, it's the Crown Posada here on the quayside. So as I've mentioned in previous videos, Newcastle's oldest pub is the George Inn off the Cloth Market next to the Big Market, and that was opened and established in 1586. The Crown Posada here on the quayside, it's 230 years old, so it opened round about 1780. I can't find out a lot about the pub back in those early days, other than legend has it that when the River Tyne was having all sorts of ships from all over the world come in, there were Spanish ships, and one of the Spanish captains, he had a mistress on Tyneside, and he bought the pub because it used to be called the Crown, and in her honour, if you like, he renamed it the Crown Posada, which is the Posada is a Spanish word for inn. I do know the pub was rebuilt in 1880, and anecdotally, I'm just joining the dots. After the Great Fire in 1854, I'm presuming that there was some damage sustained to the pub. So here we are today in the Crown Posada, and a few weeks ago it reopened after being refurbished. It was closed during the various lockdowns with the pandemic, and they've managed to keep all the kind as close as they can all the original features of the pub, the high grandiose ceiling, the panelling and the type of bar that it is, and the original 2 stained glass windows at the very front there, which show a lady pouring a goblet of wine for a Tudor merchant. At the front of the bar as well, it boasts a little snug, which is quite cosy if you fancy getting a few friends together. So the pub that sells now is traditional cask ales, but one of the most fascinating things for me is that there's an old record player right next to the bar, going back to like the 1950s, and they play records on it. Even right now, as I'm talking, they're playing old records. It's fantastic. So that's it for another Did You Know video, and I hope you enjoyed it. This is going to be part 1 of another video I'll do in the near future. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give us a thumbs up. If I've made any factual errors, don't jump all over us, just leave a comment below and tidy up what I might have missed. And just to mention as well that nobody's sponsored me through this video. Everything's come out of my own pocket. So until the next time, catch you later.